Welcome back to the Car Design News Dialogues Asia, and I'm proud to be moderating this session. The panel session, Autodesk discussed the future trends in automotive digital design tools. But this session has a unique twist to it. This is a global event where we're covering the whole of the Asian market. And as Phil Botley will introduce the team at Autodesk, you'll see they've got people from all over the world speaking, but also within the chat function. So if you've got a question in Chinese and Mandarin, or in Korean or in Japanese, please put it into the chat function and the team at Autodesk are on hand. You can also go to their expo booth where they've got actually white papers and videos in multiple languages, so you can digest the information, or you can have a private chat with them. But the session is what it's about. And I've got Phil Botley, alias product manager at Autodesk, who's actually going to chair the session with his two colleagues. And I'll come in at the end to ask them some super difficult questions. So all over to you, Phil.
Great. Thanks, Abel. And I'll just second what Abel said. Native translation in the chat function. So any questions, Japanese, Chinese, type them in there. Our guys are there to answer them. So if you don't know English, that's fine. Type them in and we'll get back to you ASAP. Simple questions, please, not difficult ones. Abel's got the difficult ones. Anyway, as Abel said, my name is Phil Botley. I am the alias product manager. We've been doing these for the past 18 months, these seminars and these great car design dialogues with Abel and his gang. So really happy to bring my old mucker, Steve Covert, together for a kind of an updated session based on one we did earlier in the year, but also a new introduction here, Ning from our Chinese team, who's also got some great insights to some of his, some concept design and sub-D and everything. Anyway, getting ahead of myself, over to Steve to introduce himself, and then Ning will introduce himself, and then we'll start the discussion. Steve.
Thanks, Phil. Well, my name's Stephen Covert. I've been involved in surfacing in the car industry for over 30 years now, both A-class and CAS modelling as well. Not only as a surfacing engineer, but also as a trainer. So I've trained no end of people on ISOM Surf and Alias in the past, and then more recently for Autodesk last year. And so one of the projects that my company did in the last 20 years was the Ford GT, which we did the A-class services for. So yeah, welcome to you all, and pass you back to Phil.
Thanks, Steve. Good to have you back again. This is becoming a regular event. Every quarter we have these these chats and sessions. And of course, we have a new addition now, Ning, and I'm sure Ning's going to be a regular participant in these sessions. Ning, over to you. Would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers?
Okay, thank you, Phil. I'm Ning Ding from Autodesk Shanghai, and I'm responsible for industry design and visualization for the China market. And I used to be a car designer, a concept designer in Paytech for about 3 years, interior and exterior design, most focused on the advanced design. So enough about me. Thank you for inviting me.
Just before I forget, what Ning didn't mention is he's actually an author. And it's a plug for your new book, Ning. So Ning has a new book out very soon, all about alias and modeling and subdivision. It's a beautiful book. I've seen it. It's really, really cool. Ning, when is that book released, and how can the viewers get hold of it?
Thanks, Phil, for mentioning it. It's nearly published and in this month, I guess. Yeah, wow. I will definitely send you a copy.
And can you order it online for people who might be interested? Can you order it online?
Yeah, it should be. People can get it online, but it's a full Chinese version. All Chinese characters. I really hope it could be published overseas, translated into other languages. That'll be beyond my honor. I hope so. But I have to guarantee that this book is really good. So.
Well, I mean, it's good, right? I mean, the sketches you've done, the models you've done, it's a beautiful piece of work, Steve. Actually, Ning's going to send me a copy, and I'll send you a copy also, Steve. But it's really really good. Nice work.
Yeah, thank
anyway,
you.
that was a plug for for Ning's kind of sideline business. Anyway, so what I thought I'd do for this session is really, begin to explore and tease out some more of these themes that we talked on, Steve and I talked on last time. And also maybe pivot it earlier in the process and really look at areas of subdivision modeling. How do we work efficiently in subdivision? Can we take it all right the way through into engineering, into production, etc.? And what are the issues there or concerns there? And also touch on some other areas such as the style-aware design tools. How can we begin to integrate aspects of features or artificial intelligence and what benefits are there? And also from Ning's perspective, some of the trends that he's seeing in the Chinese customers to really kind of double down on the digital design phase and get those products out faster. So I think it'll be an interesting discussion, different opinions from the UK, from development side, from my side, and from Ning's side and the Chinese side. So I hope you'll find it. I hope you find it quite rewarding. I guess it's a first kick-off there. Ning, just maybe talk about some of your experience with subdivision modeling and some of the work you've done in Alias and some of the projects you've done for your book, and then we can sort of dovetail that in with Steve's experience and some of his ideas as well. So, some ideas, Ning. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, actually, since we released the subdivision function in 2019 in Alias 2020, it's a big thing, we got a lot of quite positive feedback from the customers, not only the traditional OEMs, especially for the new energy vehicles companies, that their users they highly praised about this subd function. And also a quite interesting thing is they are not just using the subd for the first version of the concept model, the rough model, and we see a lot of feedback that they want to push further, even to the near class A, pre-class A, or we always got the request like, can we just make the subd deliver the class A model? Such opinion like that. Yeah, it's pretty aggressive. I think.
So people are actually taking it and moving it, kind of out of CAS into the class A, the class A area, I guess, and sort of maturing it as it goes along that process.
Right.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. I mean, Steve, what's your take on that? It sounds like the ideal world, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I'm aware of subd, but it's not something that I've used in anger in any project yet. But I can see that it's got enormous potential. I mean, it seems to be incredibly easy to learn technically, at least. If you're familiar with Alias, it seems to be like I spent half an hour looking through all the functions and playing with them, and it was just so straightforward to understand what was going on. There's always been these areas in A-class surfacing where you think, because the trouble is with A-class surfacing, you're always limited by the rectangular patch, but you're trying to build something from rectangular patches, and of course organic shapes are not conducive to rectangular patches everywhere, and sometimes the structures you have to come up with can take days to develop in areas which might be only a few millimeters across. And so I've always felt that that something that could do those difficult organic areas where the surfaces will do whatever they will do in that area, but having to construct it from rectangular patches is very, very difficult and time consuming, and really there isn't much payback for it. You're basically filling a hole. And yes, I can see, I've heard that people are actually using subd surfaces and actually taking them into CATIA and they can manipulate them and do things with them that they've not been able to do previously. So I think there's huge potential for it. I mean, the interesting thing for me, coming from the other side, really, from the A-class side, although as I say, I've had experience of doing CAS modeling, but in Alias, is where you do the crossover. If you're going to start off in sub D, where do you stop? Where do you pick it up in Alias and finish it off, or do you finish it all off in Alias? Maybe there's bits of the sub D model, like Ning says, maybe the sub D has got a place in some of the A-class work, and maybe bits of the sub D model you would retain in the A-class model, because there may be no point in actually reworking those areas. But so it's an interesting area for development, I think, in terms of not only the technology but the users, and how we use these tools as a team.
And I think that's something that we tried to put into the tools, as Ning says, a couple of years ago when they first released. We kind of wanted them to be used in the pipeline. So if you wanted to, you could use them all the way through into engineering. We wanted the representation of the geometry, to be exactly the same as Bezier or NURBS that we have in Alias. So it's a NURBS-based definition of subdivision. Geometry is not polygons; it's proper NURBS, which means we can actually take it right the way through. But also now, what we're beginning to look into is how can we improve, with G2 continuous, very high levels continuity, but how can we actually go higher? To G3, and how can we get those washouts and control those washouts? As you said, it's difficult features. You can just suck in a kind of a sub-D surface along there, match it in seamlessly because it's the same geometry into your Bezier blocks, and then you can just use that right the way through because geometric data is geometric data, etc., etc. So that's certainly one of the principles underlying our approach to subdivision, that it's just a tool inside of Alias, and you can take it as far as you take your Alias data. So you're not having to import it, convert it, export it, etc. It's on that pipeline. And of course, all the capabilities that you have, such as projecting, trimming. We're implementing a new tool for multi-surface trimming, so it treats it as one entity. So, but we're really looking to give the users that power. So as you rightly say, Stephen Ning, you don't have to remodel it. If it's applicable and it's good quality, you can use it right the way through into your engineering departments.
I think the fact that you've got an interface which is compatible with Alias means that the learning curve for Alias users is going to be extremely short. It's how you use the tool rather than which button do you press. You sort of know what you want to do, but it's just it's methodology development, really. Yeah. Which I think is always key to anything new or emerging. That it's how you use that software as well as the functions that are within it.
Yeah, and then that's a really good point you make also. I don't know, something Ning can chime in, because what we're finding is, and especially our conversations with a lot of, in fact, all auto studios, right? Is they really want to get the designers modeling in 3D as quickly as possible, whether it be in VR or whether it be in sub-D. And if we can make the interface even simpler and more intuitive, then we can get that 3D data quickly. We can explore ideas, and we can begin to make faster decisions. And we're doing a number of projects with a number of OEMs to create a very simplified, in inverted commas, UI, so designers can just be productive in half an hour, not have to know everything about Alias, but can just work, sketch, model very, very intuitively. But I welcome your input on that thing, from the importance of getting that 3D geometry created as quickly as possible in a very intuitive way by young designers.
Yeah, exactly. That should be a very good news, for the concept designers. Since they kind of already knew it's time for them, for the workflow to do a little change. Since their traditional way is still based on the 2D sketch, and the 2D maybe Photoshop rendering, but sometimes they may find that the 2D have a lot of limitations. some of the parts, some of the features could not be expressed correctly on the 2D. So they will have a lot of issues on the 3D model, since they kind of have they have no idea what the real 3D model would be like. So and they also found even some of the designers, they don't know how to build their own 3D model. But since the digital sculptures, they create 3D model for them, they will find the model is much lively than the traditional way. The quite experienced modelers, they used to use the nurse modeling, and sometimes they will just figure a very specific parts of the model, and they always use the hide unselected tools. So some of the designers will get confused. They will have no idea the model is doing, why it's doing this part. What I'm asking is another part, But since you got the 3D model, they will see the whole car. They will see, oh, that's my model. So
yeah.
Even I could make a little modification, move some CVs to change some lines, curves, and I think the next stage would be like just like Phil, you were saying, if the UI and the working flow be much simpler, maybe than now, they will be ready to take part in. They could use their own creativity to build their own cars, own features. That should be great, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the point you make about creativity is really something that, if we're building software, it's kind of rules based, not in a kind of an engineering sense, but you have to build a square or a bi-rail or a surface in this particular way. So sometimes you have to know where you're going before you start building it, which can be quite confusing and can quite constrain you. So what we're finding, to your point exactly, is that with Subdeed is that freedom to explore, but critically also that freedom to make mistakes, right? It allows you to do things which are freaky and go, oh, I didn't think that would do that, but you know what? That's actually quite nice, and I'm going to keep it in the car. And so again, we're beginning to explore. And I was chatting with a colleague in another company about this a while ago, about the importance of making mistakes in design, right, and making sure that the software allows you to do that and doesn't kind of remove all that, because some of the best ideas come out of explorations and ideas and going down a different rabbit hole. And so we're going to be introducing over time some aspects of ambiguity modeling into Alias, or other suites of tools that really foster and encourage mistakes to be made, which is really quite an exciting, counterintuitive way to surface model, I think. But as you rightly say, also, if you have your shape, and as a designer you can alter it, but also maybe as a surfacing manager you can alter the same model, maybe using different tools, there comes an interesting way to interact on the same data set, but using different lenses, right? I use my surface manager's lens, I use my class A lens or my designer lens, and that's incumbent on us as software developers to allow users to interact with the tools in a way they're familiar with and feel happy and confident with. So I think it's a really interesting trend that's moving forward.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for tools which democratize the process, so that you make them accessible to many people coming from different areas, from design, from surfacing, from engineering even. And if they can all work on the same model, then you cut down the number of iterations that you go through. The traditional way of the designer does a drawing, then the surface modeler has to interpret that, then the designer has to do the corrections over those images, and you go round and round, and that can take an awful long time. Working on the same data set can be a great way of reducing that time scale and making the whole process more efficient.
And to your point you made before, Steve, that data set could be a mixture of the bottom of the A pillar, you've whacked in some, some sub-D geometry to solve a tricky problem. Could be NURBS, could be Bezier, could be a bit of mesh data or scan data, right? You can optimize that to take it right the way through the process. So I think this is really interesting kind of fusion. I'm trying to stay away from the word hybrid, but there's a kind of a fusion of modeling paradigms coming together where it's about the maths and it can be geometry agnostic, right? It could be sub-D, mesh, NURBS, Bezier, as long as it's good enough to actually go all the way downstream and you can interact with it and you can manipulate it, then who's to say it's not the right approach for that team and for those users?
Exactly.
Which is
another area. Sorry, Phil.
No, after you, Steve. Come on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, another thing that, traditionally has happened is that you've got CAS modelers doing an alias model in a particular way, which then gets thrown over a wall to the A-class modelers, who then cut sections through it and throw the surfaces away and then start again. And by sort of eliminating those barriers, those walls between departments, that's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think sub-D comes into that equation. It's how you fit that, how you fit in, as I say, which bits of the model, when you get to the A-class end, which bits of the model, the sub-D model, do you retain, if any? How do you do that transition? When do you do that transition? And I think we'll only discover that by actually doing it within companies.
Which again comes full circle to the chats we've been having with Ning and the work we'll be doing, independent of this, and to engage with a lot of the startups in China, right? That these very agile companies that aren't incumbent, with decades of process or IT backbones, or because we've always done it this way, we have to do Alias, Clay, ISOMSurf, CATIA. They're thinking, actually, you know what? No, that's just too long, right? We need to actually take the data and think radically and actually use the data and mature the data right the way through. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Ming, this is what we're seeing in some of the young Chinese companies that are really embracing this approach.
Yeah, you're quite right. Yes, the process really like that. The kind of a routine. But that is not settled. It's not freezed. So yeah, just like you say, the sub-D and from alias and from the very concept to class A. It's like a journey. It's like a seamless journey.
Yeah, it's a journey, and then that's to Steve's point. There's a kind of a perception of, because it's always been that way, it always has to stay that way. But actually, sometimes you do need to kind of change, and we're seeing this in some of the big automotive companies as well, where they're throwing out ripping up the rule book and saying, okay, we need to be more agile, we need to be quicker. And we're doing a lot of stuff with some of those guys who are implementing an agile design process to allow them to be flexible and to think the unthinkable, really, to use your alias data all the way through. And it's like, ooh, it's heresy for some people. It's like, oh, they're never going to use that. But a lot of customers are embracing it and are seeing the benefits of it. So that's really quite exciting. Which it kind of gets me onto this other topic that we talked about vaguely last time, Steve, and this nature of a style aware design tools and beginning to capture design IP from a company and bake it into the modeling process somehow. And the point you made was really interesting, Steve, about how can you actually take that CAS data and potentially convert it to Class A or standard, or take the sub-D data, which suggests an interesting question where, if you could automatically surface that geometry because you knew the surfacing language of the Class A team or manufacturing, and you could rebuild it automatically, that would really improve the design iterations and the time to market. I mean, is that feasible, do you think, Steve, to capture that patch planning knowledge, convert it into some clever maths, and then put it into the software, or even guide the user?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's mileage in there. I mean, you do find yourself, as a surfacer, A-class surfacer, you end up doing exactly the same patch structure again and again, but just with different size geometry. So, you know, the simplest example being a ball corner. You've got 3 fillets coming into a corner and you put a ball corner in, and every time you do it exactly the same way, regardless of whether it's G2, G3, G1. It's exactly the same method, and the size of the thing doesn't matter. The angles don't matter. It's always the same process. And, you know, I dread to think how many thousands of hours I've spent doing ball corners, where I'm, you know, trying to get all the CVs lined up, and you know, it's going to pass scrutiny of the the surfacing managers, and that's just one example. There's like you mentioned before, you know, where you've got fillets washing out into a flat area. Again, we do that, and we do it with methodologies that work every time, and it's the same methodology, but you have to apply it to different size geometry. But you have to go through it, and it's quite a laborious process. You get more efficient in time, but you know, if software can take away some of that hard work, then it all helps enormously.
And I think that's that's the key thing. There's a methodology, right? It's an approach. You know how to build it mathematically. You know how to build it, and if you can somehow capture that and reuse it and create you know, a series of washouts, libraries, or you know, something is. I'm reducing it to basic principles, but the computer would watch you model, Steve, and would see how you're modeling, and then could actually, you know, create an algorithm based on that. So when I'm modeling, or Ning, or a young guy girl who's straight out of college is doing it, Alias or the software just says, actually, if you try doing it this way, here's Steve's code, bam, straight in, and it builds it for you. And I think this is the exciting thing, because we're now on, I believe we're now on the cusp of this, right, of taking that knowledge, capturing that knowledge, and beginning to use it in not just Alias. There'll be other software packages as well from our colleagues. But I think this really liberates design, right? And I had many chats with design teams saying, "Oh, this was going to constrain our design process." Actually, it's not. It's actually going to allow you to do far more iterations. Be confident that they can go to manufacture or whatever, and allow you to explore different ideas faster than ever before. So I do think this approach could be quite game changing. I think
that's a very valid point, what you said about, you know, there's a fear that if you have all these functions, then our jobs are at jeopardy. You know, like you said, design won't be as flexible. We had exactly the same problem when ISOMSurf and Alias came on the scene back in, you know, a long time ago, 1990s sort of time in the UK, for example, where we would, for example, the system we were using inside Rover Group, where I was working at the time, we used to quote something like 16 to 19 weeks to do one bumper in the old system. And then, you know, ISOMSurf and Alias come along, and you can do the same job in a week or two. Nobody's job went. We just, you know, we did more iterations because when it was 16 to 19 weeks to do a bumper, we had no time for iterations. We had to have a clay that was completely feasible, and then you surfaced it, and then it went into tooling. That was it. There was no iteration on the screen.
Yeah.
Nowadays we do hundreds of iterations. I mean, probably too many in some cases, but you know, this does open up the possibility of doing more iterations, and the number of, you know, vehicle companies around the world now. There's a need for speeding up the process.
Well, and I think that's spot on, isn't it? I mean, and it's that fear, right? And I think that people are really freaked out about it, but it just, as you say, more iterations, and it's this interesting effect also, that even though the tools have got faster and there's more iterations, I'm talking generally here, car projects still, near as damn it, take the same amount of time to get out, apart from some young companies. But we've had many chats because we're beginning to implement this with some of our customers, right? And we're freeing up this time, and you can see their eyes lighting up, going, "Oh, we've got all this time. What are we going to do with it?" And And we say, well, it's time back, right? Iterate, focus on quality. We recently did some work where a process would normally take 2 weeks. The customer's now doing it in 7 minutes. And you think of the iterations that you can do super quickly. Sod's law, my instinct tells me they'll still take them 2 weeks to do it, but they'll have 2 weeks worth of 7-minute iterations, which means the design is far more evolved than it would be, which is really a real interesting concept. If you step back, it means that you're getting 2, 3, 4 facelifts into one major release because you're doing all the facelift iterations perhaps in that time frame. This really is quite powerful, a powerful concept, really. I think to actually bake in the intelligence, speed up your process, give you more time to mature your design faster than you normally would,
or come out with more designs as well. So if you've reduced your time to market, then you can come out with 4 designs where before you only had 1.
But exactly, and that's again circling back with Ning. That's what maybe your experience here, Ning, of working with some of the Chinese manufacturers who seem to be just very, very quick and very fast and iterating at an unprecedented rate, and that seems to be a pattern that's emerging in China from the automotive manufacturers.
Exactly, you are. Yeah, it's actually it's a common situation now. Because the digital sculptures, they always be asked to finish the quite high quality model in a very short time, and also from the design and the requirement, they need more variants, more alternatives. And now, if you're looking at car parts, some parts, even quite high quality services, you could actually the process of making these parts is kind of routine. Actually, every modeler should follow some process, to finish. But these parts don't have many differences from the design side, and the core of the creative design sometimes only happen on some certain areas, some proportion, some quite different design themes, but almost most of the parts we should follow just maybe one routine we can finish. So the modelers, the requirement is like they want like automation or more mature way to do that, and they can focus on these core of the creativity parts. So they can have more variants, more design like choices for the.
So there's a kind of a really a kind of quite a sophisticated approach, right? Which is what you're saying, where the big modular, which can be processed or automated in their standard, let them be automated and processed with tools, but focus on those discrete bits where creativity is a differentiator, and then alter those very quickly. Instead of actually treating the whole car as the same. Okay, that's an interesting. And is that for interior and exterior?
Exactly, and especially for the interior design, they actually some of the parts, some of the key parts have a lot of engineering requirements. Some of the parts you don't have many things to do. You shouldn't have many modification. So that part you definitely need automation or some certain routines to finish it and keep it high quality, service quality, and fulfill all the engineering requirements. Yes.
It kind of goes back to your original point then, Steve, doesn't it, about having the geometry or the approach that's applicable for that component, but fusing it all together so it's seamlessly integrated. It doesn't matter what part it is. If it's computational design for this part, that's fine. If it's sub-D for that part, that's fine. If it's nerves for that part, that's fine. But making them all work together and allowing you to use that data right away, down the process, upstream, left stream, downstream, wherever.
Definitely. I mean, I think the ability for people to be able to interact with the data is a means of communication, isn't it? That's like a common language within the design process, and having the same data set, which, like you say, can be composed of various different things, is the way that we communicate in a big way in design. And the more barriers we've got in the way of that communication, the less efficient the process is. So breaking down these barriers and all working off the same data set is a fantastic way forward, I think.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it really is and I think it's going to become the future. I mean, to Abel's point originally about the strangeness of these past 12 months, about how design processes. I mean, Steve, because you were in South Korea in the middle of COVID for us. Thanks for that. But this is really accelerated change, and people that can actually now think outside their box and I think actually, you know what? Let's not be precious about our data. Let's actually combine the data and use it and actually get the best product out as quickly as we can, as fast as we can, to a high level of quality. So I think there's a real change coming.
Yeah. I mean, in all the projects I've ever worked on, the ones that worked the best of all were always the ones where you had engineering, design, and surfacing all working as one. And, by breaking down these barriers and having an integrated data set is one way of getting that. It is about communication, obviously verbal communication in meetings and so forth, but just as much in the data set, that being able to create new data and sharing it quickly so that other people can work on it and put their input into it is the way that the process becomes leaner and more efficient.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that doesn't mean you need a kind of a monolithic system, right? You can have expert tools sitting inside that kind of data system, and especially with these new platforms and other components we're seeing customers deploy and IT companies deploy. I think that that communication, that transparency of design is going to be even more important and possible. I was chatting with a colleague in a Swedish company a few weeks ago, and he was saying exactly that. He said these tools now allow people who normally wouldn't see design data outside of the design department to access it and see it in real time. So so as you say, so the engineering team can always have their eyes on where we are on the interior or exterior and can make informed decisions. And it's about that communication of design intent of ideas. And which, as you rightly say, Steve, speeds up the process, which is what we're seeing in China. I think with these kind of preconditioned ideas don't exist in terms of new startups, so they're just putting together something that seems sensible, and they're actually flying with it.
Right, and also we have I actually have a personal question, from for Phil, since now all the designers and the digital sculptors, they think the software can make them as still as an operator. So they are kind of wondering. So when for them could be a mentor, mentor for the software, you will see or choose what the machine could or the software could deliver, and they only make the choices. Let a computer or AI to do all the job.
I think you're spot on, Ning, and that's exactly one of the projects we're doing with, or beginning to do with a number of OEMs, and that idea of having the software as a mentor, right? The software that has the knowledge of maybe, you know, Steve's 30 years or my 20 odd years or whatever in a database, right? So when you're on Alias and or any software and you're modeling, even taking knowledge from Surf or CATIA. So when you're modeling inside of Alias helps you, right? It guides you, whether it be through some of the tool enhancements, UI enhancements, or even saying, you know, a simple analogy is a Microsoft paperclip from years ago. Anyone who remembers that, it wasn't that good, but Alias can help you build your card. And the key thing is capturing that knowledge, capturing the surfacing knowledge, the design language of that particular model you're working on, right? And we've all been there where you get new guys and girls in straight from Coventry or wherever full time, they model the car, doesn't bear any relation to styling language or anything. And then, you know, you've got to stick an Alias guy on it to remodel it. But if you had the Alias assistant helping you model from the get-go, then all of a sudden it gets a little bit smoother and you don't have to wait 6 months for a youngster to be productive and they're modeling to design standards. So I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Ning, in terms of this is something which we're also moving towards, with the software becoming more than a modeling tool. It's a mentor, it's a design assistant, it's helping you model and guiding you down whichever path you want to go down. So I think that's going to be an interesting suite of capabilities we're going to see evolving over the next years and decades in not just Alias but other softwares as well, as we all embrace this technology. And I see Abel has joined us for the for the final few moments.
Yeah, we've gone over time, but I've got so many questions, right? So we're going to run through them quickly.
Oh, great!
So the one that I really wanted to understand was the customer interface where you personalize it. Now, you talked about you've got different skill sets using different tools which work seamlessly, which again, I guess answers the question of time.
Yeah.
I guess if you have more time, but how are you doing that? And does it work across is it different for each, from a designer through to an engineering person? And how do you personalize those customer interfaces?
Well, this is something that we're beginning to find is really more important. So we have what we call a manual process. We've got this concept of workspaces, which, you know, does or doesn't work to a greater or lesser degree. So what we're beginning to explore is that as a designer, for instance, and you're looking at a Class A model, you know, as Ning and Steve pointed out, you probably have no idea which control vertices to pull. You know, what? It might even be a face. It's like, oh no, what? So how would you allow a designer to somehow just mark on it where he or she wants a highlight to go or where the line should be? With traditional tools, you might not be able to do it because you've got to project, or you've got to draw, or you've got to make it as a projection base. Complicated words. But if you could actually just have a pencil that allowed you to draw on it, and then that became a curve on surface, or that was a highlight which is linked to the geometry, and then you could actually move it. So I think it's all about the technologies there. It's about putting what we call a lens on top of it. So we have a designer lens, so all the maths hides away, and you can just work on it in an intuitive way. You have a Class A lens where, you know, the funky pencils, which the Class A guys don't want disappear, but you have all the tools you need for diagnostics or sections or curvature graphs, or even if you're if you're doing a DKM model or Visa function cube at a design review type stage, you know, the notes appear, so you can just put your sticky notes on and say problem here, gap here, and that's what we mean by kind of lenses. It's the same data, but it just changes how it's represented, and the tools which allow you to interact on them change it also to give you the tools that you need to get your job done. Pencils, diagnostic tools, sticky notes, or whatever. So it's really a kind of a lens on the data, and that's some concepts which we will be beginning to see come quite soon.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that you've hidden some of the information from the people who maybe won't require it, or might make them feel a bit like, why don't I understand that? Or why do I need that information? So I got a question for Ning next. Congratulations on your book. I think that's a great achievement, something that Steve and Phil need to aspire to. I've got a question to you. Do you think one day all designers will use 3D modeling tools? Because you're in a part of the world that has these startups that have no history and are coming at it with a different philosophy. So do you think that's going to happen? How do you think it's sooner than? Do you think China will be the first to embrace it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you, Abel, for mentioning that. You know, actually, I believe that day was will come, and it's already come. It's coming actually. You know, I knew some really creative designers in the OEMs, in the main design studios. Actually, most of them already have learned some new 3D modeling software like Alias, Maya, or Blender. You know, they kind of already entering the 3D design world. Actually, they are not just seeing the software as the modeling tools. They are seeing the software as a creativity tools. You know, for better better design and more variance. So that day, I think is coming, and I think that all the designers they've kind of already ready for this.
Excellent. Yeah, I felt that in China. Every time I go, you get this feeling, and obviously these new brands are popping up with a different philosophy and a different energy, and no rules really. So I guess they can embrace it. I got a question for Steve. Maybe Steve, you want to answer it. Maybe you don't. But this word that really bothered me was mistakes. Right now, how do you convince an OEM to make mistakes and learn from it? They're kind of like, you know, designers are very precious. They don't want to make mistakes. Human beings don't want to look embarrassed that I've made a mistake. How do you kind of get to that point where by making a mistake, by stretching something through sub D and it going, yeah, you can do that. And then giving it to to class A. I mean, how do you do that? Steve, is there any ideas you've got? How do you convince a car maker to do that or designer to do that?
I think mistakes are the lifeblood of any creative activity, really. You know, you hear from people who are in other sort of art fields, like painters and sculptors, who accidentally do something, make a mark on a canvas, and then think, actually, that looks pretty good. I'm going to keep that, and then work around it and make it as part of the art piece. I think the same thing applies in car design. That, you know, sometimes you know, when you're surfacing, or the designer's designing, they're thinking, I'm not sure how to do this area. Let's just try this, and it could be something that's unconventional that you might, standing outside, call a mistake, but it's actually all part of the creative process that I think all creative people go through. I think if you're too not making mistakes implies that you're too rigid in your thinking. That you always stay within the boundaries that you've set yourself at the start, and that's just not the way that I've seen design, you know, from the outside, seen designers working. And likewise, as a surfacer, you know, I sometimes will put in things which I think, well, I'm not sure whether this is going to work. I'm just making this up because I really have no fixed solution for this. I'm just going to try something, and as a result of doing it 10 different times in 10 different ways, you pick the mistake that was the best solution, and I think you get a better result that way.
Yeah, I totally agree. Looking at other industries where the mistakes can be part of the process, it's really sharing it. But we've gone way over the time, and I've got one final question. But before I finish with this one question, if you do have any questions, like Phil said, like I said, if you want to go to the chat function, put them in any language you like. The team are there in the Asian region to answer them. Also, you can go to the Autodesk booth to talk to the guys directly, either openly or in a private chat as well. But the final question here. So what impact from COVID do you see in the auto industry design process? What have you seen that has been has had an impact, and the digital design tools have fixed it and will continue to operate in that space.
So for each of us, Abel,
I think that's for each of you for a quick answer, and then we'll wrap up.
Steve, you're the top. Do you want to go first?
Well, the obvious one is remote working. That it's proven to a lot of companies, I think, that remote working can work.
Okay, Ning, can you jump in?
Yeah, I think it'll be going to be virtual. Virtual is quite essential for, especially for this kind of period of time. We will see we don't stick to the physical or face-to-face. Everything's still going to be digital and virtual, and we still could make the right choice, even better choice in this virtual world. That's my comments.
Excellent. And Phil, can you bring it home?
Yeah, I mean, similar, echoing those, but I think there's going to be a lot more ripples long term in the auto design industry in terms of how we design, what we design, how we use these tools. So I don't think we've seen the full impact really of this year and a bit of disruption yet. I think it's going to take a while for us to trickle all the way through into the OEM supply chain, startup companies, and how we do business. So I think we're just in the beginning of this journey to see the impact of COVID on the design process.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. That was a fascinating session. Really enjoyed being part of it. Look forward to the rest of it. Now, like I said, go to the booth of Autodesk. You'll get some more information. These guys will be online. Have a chat with them, and we'll see you after this break.